Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this public lecture, which is co-hosted by the ELA and CLES. Before we get going, please just take note of the following housekeeping rules. I have to ask that you please keep your camera switched off and your microphones muted. And we will also be recording this session to be posted on YouTube at a later stage. This reminds me, I just want to check if we are recording.
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, thank you. And then the program for today will look as follows. Okay, first up, we will have Prof. Oliver Voer, who will tell us more about CLES and the work that we do. And then we have Prof. Germany Viljoen, who will briefly tell us more about the ELA. Next up is Ms. Mishka Diedrichs, who will introduce the speaker, Dr. Fredua Agyemang. Dr. Agyemang will deliver this lecture, and once he's done, Ms. Diedrichs will conduct a Q&A session for us. This is where you will get an opportunity to pose questions to the speaker. And then afterwards, Dr. Agyemang will share his final thoughts, if he has any, and then Ms. Diedrichs will wrap up for us. Prof. Voer is running a little bit late due to an emergency, so he asked me if I could stand in for him. So I can just briefly tell you more about CLES. The South African Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability, that's where the name CLES comes from, was established in 2018 as one of the SARCHI Initiative Research Chairs by the National Research Foundation of South Africa. The research chair is held by the Northwest University and forms part of the research unit on law, justice and sustainability of the Faculty of Law, which is situated in Potchefstroom in South Africa. CLES is an academic institution devoted to legal scholarship and research skills development for sustainable urban development in South Africa, the broader African region and beyond. To this end, the chair currently hosts 2 full-time postdoctoral fellows, one of which, of course, will be our speaker for today. Then we also have 6 doctoral students and 1 LLM student. And we also expect another LLM student to join us shortly, all the way from Nigeria. And they to further their studies in the intersecting field of law, governance and urban development and environmental sustainability. Our interim chairholder is Prof. Oliver Voer. He's an established researcher in the field of local government and social justice with an interest in environmental law. To all our listeners and attendees, you are welcome to visit our website, social media channels, and to read our newsletter to stay up to date with our events and our research outputs. Okay, I think that's it from my side. I'll now hand over to Prof. Germany Viljoen to please tell us a little bit more about the ELA. Prof. Germany, whenever you're ready, you're welcome to proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Erasmus. And from my side, good afternoon, colleagues and friends. I hope I'm audible. It's my pleasure to also welcome you and to briefly introduce the Environmental Law Association of South Africa, and then particularly the Northwest branch. For those of you who may not be familiar with the association, the ELA is a non-profit voluntary organization that brings together academics, legal practitioners, policymakers, and also students who share a common commitment to environmental law and governance. I'm proud to say that the ELA plays an important role in promoting environmental justice, sustainability, and also legal accountability across South Africa. And we pursue this mission through research, through advocacy, and also through knowledge sharing. And here in Northwest, our branch contributes to this broader mission by fostering dialogue and supporting legal education and engaging with environmental challenges, especially those relating to mining, which are, of course, of particular relevance to our region. So yeah, perhaps just a quick invitation. If you're passionate about environmental law and would like to be part of this growing and very dynamic community, I encourage you to visit our website and consider signing up as a member. We would really be delighted to welcome you to the ELA community. So once again, on behalf of the ELA, welcome to today's lecture. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Prof. Voljoen. Mishka, then if you're ready, over to you.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Erasmus, and also Prof. Germarie for introducing the two institutions and speaking a bit about their aims and objectives. As stated by Dr. Erasmus, today I get to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Fredua Agyemang, or Agyemang. Dr. Agyemang is a postdoctoral researcher at the CLES chair, and he holds several postgraduate degrees, such as a PhD in urban and regional planning from the Northwest University, a master's in town and regional planning from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, 2 Master of Law degrees in public law from the University of the Western Cape and the University of Pretoria, respectively, with each of them specializing in different areas such as extractive industry law and environmental law, and then a postgraduate certificate in basic education from the University of South Africa, and a Bachelor of Science in Land Economy from Kwame University of Science in Ghana. Then Dr. Agyemang is a published researcher with peer-reviewed articles on sustainable cities and mining communities, and has presented his research at national and international conferences. Now today, he'll be speaking to us about an area of his expertise, namely comparative legal solutions for rehabilitating legacy mines, and looking at the financial provisions in South Africa and in Western Australia. So this is a really timely topic, considering that the Northwest Province has its own issues and challenges with abandoned mines and illegal mining that aired quite frequently on the news at the beginning of 2025. So Dr. Agyemang, we are excited to listen to your presentation and hear your insights. And with that, the floor is yours. You may share your screen and start your presentation whenever you're ready.
I hope you can see me.
Yes, Dr. Fred, you're visible.
It's like the place is a little bit dark. Thank you very much, Mishka, for the brief introduction. Let me share my slides with you so that we can start the program. Yeah, I hope you can see the slides enough. Are you able to see the slides? Hello?
Sorry, yes, Dr.
Yes,
Fred.
they are good.
Oh, okay. I think we all know today is a public lecture, and as Mishka has already done the brief introduction, there is no need for me to introduce myself again. The topic at hand is Comparative Legal Solutions for Rehabilitating Legacy Mines, that is financial provision in South Africa and Western Australia. We all know this is a very thorny issue as far as the rehabilitation of legacy mine is concerned. And it is important to know that this challenge is not only peculiar to South Africa. As you know, several countries like Germany, several countries like America, UK, they all have issues with legacy mine. So let me first of all take you through the mining background in South Africa. Diamond was discovered in 1867. There was a gold rush in 1880s. 1903, the mine ordinance came. to regulate the mining. And when it comes to Australia, in terms of mining, there was also a gold rush in the 1850s. Also, there was resource hookup with limited early environmental concern. Because you know that mining is, to say, is as old as mankind, so to speak. Because like even the first man started to mine using tools and all that. But by then, we never had laws regulating environmental liability pertaining to mining. So now, issues of legacy mine, as I said, is not only peculiar to South Africa. What is legacy mines in the first place? They are mines whose owners cannot be traced, which means it predates the law. When you look at that of United States of America, they define legacy mines as all those mines which were there before the advent of the Good Samaritan law, which recently came, or before the advent of the laws which came in the 1980s. So to put this lecture into perspective, I would say in terms of South Africa legacy mines, I'm going to take it from those mines that predate before the coming into force of the NEMA and the MPRDA, which means those laws were not in existence when those minings were in operation. Hence, there were no environmental laws regulating such mining sites. So let's move on to the next slide. Let's see the geographical footprint of legacy mines in South Africa. We have like 6,100 legacy mines in South Africa. You could see the geographical distribution of the legacy mines as indicated on the map. Now let's progress. And in the context of Western Australia, we have 60,000 abandoned mines, which is also known as legacy mines. Other countries call it orphan mines, others call it historically abandoned mines and all that. So depending on the jurisdiction, there are various terms that are used to describe what is meant by legacy mines. And in South Africa, we normally call it derelict mines, those mines whose owners cannot be traced. So as I said, to put it in a context, I prefer to say those mines which were there before the advent of the South African environmental law regulating mining rehabilitation. Now, this is also the geographical footprint of legacy mines in Western Australia, which is on my extreme left. Western Australia, you could see the footprint is very heavy and almost similar to that of South Africa. Now, there are some environmental and legal impact as far as legacy mines is concerned. In this context, I'm going to dwell much on South Africa. First of all, it violates Section 24 of the Constitution, that is right to a healthy environment. And in terms of environmental hazards, we have the acid mine drainage, of which I'm going to dwell much on it at a later stage. That's related to respiratory illness from legacy mines, water and soil contamination, land and subsidence. Now, as far as I'm concerned, since I'm a town planner, I normally like to deal with space. In terms of acid mine drainage, you could see where we have like the Vaal River, which supplies water to the Johannesburg enclave. And if you look at the other side of the map, we have like those where legacy mines are predominant. So you could see its impact on rivers of South Africa is very huge. And you could see the impact of acid mine drainage. Look at how the water has been polluted, its impact on South African water infrastructures and all that. Now we have, beyond environmental impact, we have socio-ecological consequence, health risk. Also, we have like illegal mine, of which we all know what is illegal mines, those mining operations that take place without having license to operate. And in South Africa, we call it Zama. And the South African government is really battling to do with Zama. Recently, we have issues with Stilfontein. It was all over the news. And according to the Minister of Minerals, Gwede Mantashe said we need about 49 billion to deal with the issue of Zama. Now, let's quickly move on. Now, it also has land impact, because as far as I'm concerned, normally mining projects span for a period of 20 years or 10 years. So we could see that all lands which are embedded with minerals, the mineral underneath belongs to the South African government. It's vested in the state. But the surface rights also goes to the indigenous people. So once mining license has been issued, and let's say the project comes to a closure, the land is supposed to go back to the indigenous owners. But what do we see? Since there has not been rehabilitation of or proper closure of the mining site, the land, even if it is reverted to the indigenous owners, cannot be used for anything. So in essence, we are depriving them of farming, grazing, and traditional lands, loss of livelihood, and also intergenerational equity. Because if we are not able to rehabilitate it, we deny the indigenous people access to farmlands, access to grazing fields, and sometimes cultural issues. So I've already made mention of intergenerational equity. Also, in terms of cost, we need, like, South Africa needs about 42 billion rands just to rehabilitate only 5 of these abandoned mines. So it tells you the magnitude of money which is needed to sort this issue. Now, let's see how the benefits of rehabilitating these legacy mines. Once these legacy mines are rehabilitated, we can have like habitat restoration. We can also deal with our soil and water pollution projects and all that, carbon sequestration. Now, once these sites are rehabilitated, we can repurpose those sites for other economic activities. It could also have like cultural benefits. The issue of Zama will be gone. So one may ask, why is it that restoration of these legacy mines has got really a lot of benefits? Why is the government not doing it? As I've already alluded to, mining predates the laws. Those legacy mines, they predate the laws of South Africa. So when it comes to law, certain legal principles, no law, no crime, because those mining operations took place before the advent of the law, which means there wasn't any law, so you cannot really persecute the offender. And since the law came, there is something we call retrospective laws. You know, law, the non-retrospective nature of the law does not really allow the South African government to persecute those operators who cause environmental damage. So which means no law, no crime, and the non-retrospective nature of the law does not really allow the South African government to persecute the mining operators, the polluters. Now, this has given us the need to really delve into how we are going to solve the issue of legacy mines and to reap the benefits of legacy mines, and also to avert its huge environmental cost, social cost, and economic cost. So in this view, I've decided to do a comparative case study between that of South Africa and Western Australia, which has been put into paper. The paper might be submitted and it may come out soon. Now, the key themes to use has to do with financial rehabilitation measures and how effective had the South African legislation been, or the Western Australian legislation, as far as legacy mine rehabilitation is concerned. So when it comes to mining financial rehabilitation in South Africa, it is mostly dealt under the NPRDA, which is section 45 and 46. It says the minister may act if operator is diseased, liquidated, or untraceable. In this case, I'm going to dwell much on untraceable because those polluters cannot be traced. Even if they could be traced, as I've already said, the non-retrospective nature of the law does not allow them to be persecuted. Also, there were no laws regulating such activities. So no law, no crime, which means the government has to assume responsibility to rehabilitate those sites. So let's see whether the section 45 and 46 in terms of making financial provision for legacy mines is effective or not. The first observation that I've made in terms of the disadvantages, it says once the government takes control of it, it means it shifts the burden to the taxpayer. Also, it contradicts some of the legal principles such as polluter pay and the duty of care, and it also undermines accountability. Moreover, it contradicts some of the South African policies as far as mining is concerned, especially section 4.1, subsection V of the White Paper, which is Mineral and Mining Policy for South Africa, passed in October 1998 in Victoria, says that the government will have to ensure that the cost of environmental impacts of the mining industry are not passed over to the community. And I believe this is more explicit. So once the government assumes responsibility to provide financial means to rehabilitate those legacy mines, it is going in contradictory to that of that mineral and mining policy, and also the polluter pay principle and the duty of care principle. Now let's move on to see how these laws have been effective or whether it has been able to really achieve its aim, because still, judging from the adverse impact of legacy mines, something needs to be done. So the laws are there. Now, from observation, the South African government sets an ambitious target, which says it was going to rehabilitate 2,000 derelict ownerless mines by 2021. And in the long term, the first objective was short term, but the second objective says all the 6,100 derelict ownerless mines are going to be rehabilitated by 2038. But how is the reality? As of between 2006 to 2007, only 32 of 261 asbestos mines, which falls under legacy mines, has been rehabilitated. 12% progression in 2 decades. We have like 2,322 high-risk EOMs, which has never been rehabilitated. And also, we could see that the 2033 targets, which the government set, may not be met. So in reality, the laws are not really being applied effectively to rehabilitate these legacy mines, which is causing environmental havoc. So if you look at this graph, it tells you the actual rates. It tells you the evaluation report target, which says we're supposed to rehabilitate it by 2033. But the budget allocation for this means that we have to extend it from 2033 to 2043. And a private evaluator, that is Mintech, did a 3-year cycle implementation plan, which says, in reality, all these 6,100 legacy mines could only be rehabilitated by 2090. And the actual rate, because sometimes you know what they put on paper is not a true reflection on what is happening on the ground. So which means 2090 is not even feasible. In reality, we can only achieve this by 21-23. Now, what is preventing the South African government from really applying the laws effectively? Key challenges include fragmented implementation, chronic underfunding from the Treasury, because as I said, the Treasury was supposed to provide money so that all these, some of the asbestos mines could be rehabilitated by 2033, but in reality, judging from the trend of funding provided by the Treasury, we can only achieve this by 2043. And again, it's like we are only focusing on the asbestos mines, leaving the other legacy mines untouched. So let's just provide summary on the fiscal gaps and delays. Estimated costs of the 229 asbestos mines is 3.86 billion. However, available funding is only 1.69 billion, which means only 44% has been provided. Also, full funding can only be possible by 2043. Meanwhile, we set a target that by 2033, we're going to really rehabilitate those asbestos mines. So Treasury failed to meet funding commitments, delays between plans and execution timelines, as Mintek alluded to. Operational delays, lack of adaptive management, weak strategic oversight are all causing the legacy mines to be prevented from being rehabilitated. Now, what could be the way forward? We have to really evaluate current funding models. We have to have a public-private partnership. And in Parliament, that was, I think, 2014, the Parliamentary Committee on Water and Sanitation suggested that we could really bring in those existing mines to also assist in providing levies. But the question is, are they willing to do it, since they themselves are not the polluters? They also have existing mines to provide financial provision for rehabilitation. So what do? Others are also suggesting we strengthen institutional coordination. Political will and oversight is not there. But for me, I believe it is only money issue, because looking at it from the environmental, social havoc that these legacy mines are causing to the society, if the government had enough money, maybe it would have done that. I'm saying this in the sense that even in America, they recently passed the Good Samaritan law, which is trying to include other private partners to also come in, which is the Good Samaritan in itself, which means like people who are willing to assist the government to really rehabilitate about 500,000 hard rock legacy mines in America. So now let's see if we have like any alternative solution. Let's see where and how other jurisdictions are trying to solve this issue. So I took the case of Western Australia. Western Australia has like what they call the Mining Rehabilitation Fund Act. They have established a central fund system under the Mining Rehabilitation Fund Act, which is Section 5. And that fund, which is centralized, is managed by Section 16 of the Financial Management Act of 2006. So what is the purpose? If you look at the Mining Rehabilitation Fund Act under Section 8.2, it says the levies which are paid to a central fund are specific. They are tied to a specific mining site. But however, what the government does is that it invests the principal amount, then the return on the principal, that is the return on an investment, is used to fund these legacy mines. And it's not only used to fund legacy mines, it is also used for administrative purposes as far as mining rehabilitation is concerned. Now let's see if their model, the Western Australian model, has been very effective or not. As of 2023, they had 291.2 million Australian dollar accumulated in the fund. And as I've already told you that the principal amount, which is 291.2 million, does not only sit in the fund. That money is invested. So the return on an investment is used to rehabilitate the legacy mines whose owners cannot be traced. So let's see how much interest was generated on the fund. From the 291.2 million, it was able to accrue 3.1 million interest, which means the interest goes into the rehabilitation of those legacy mines and also for administrative purposes. So you could see they have been able to use it to rehabilitate, like to embark on certain projects, legacy mine projects. We have the Safer Shaft for towns, Donnybrook Shaft, Silicate Minerals, and other. Now, this is just a picture, which I took it from the Western Australian government website, which tells us some of the projects that they've used the principal amount. As I've already told, we have the principal and the interest. So you could see the Ashmore settled, that rehabilitation process is embarked by using the principal amount. If you look at the safer side, which is the interest accumulated on the principal amount, goes into the rehabilitation of those legacy mines that we could not trace their owners. Now, the advantages that their system has over South Africa is that return-based model. It means generate fund through investment income, and it reduces direct burden, financial burden on the taxpayer, unlike South Africa, whereby the taxpayer has to fund those legacy mines. However, the Western Australian case, sorry about that, is not immune to disadvantages. So it has got some concerns as far as the model is concerned. One, as I said, it's interest dependent. So which means if you look at the current financial turbulence, what is happening in America regarding the trade wars and all that, it is not something that you could rely on. You cannot really depend on interest to finance legacy mines, because sometimes there could be economic fluctuations and all that. And the risk during economic downturns, what if those principal amounts do not yield interest? How are we going to finance it? And again, as I gave you some of the projects that they have embarked on, it's like a piecemeal whereby they target specific projects. But the picture or the map I showed to you earlier on suggests that the spatial distribution of legacy mines in Western Australia is very massive. So if you look at the interest generated and we juxtapose it with the current spatial footprint of legacy mines in Western Australia, you could see that interest of 3.1 million is not really enough to really finance the legacy mines that are in Western Australia. So let's look at the current trends of legacy mines. We have like 43,876 hectares under rehabilitation, which is only 4.4%. And we have 182,059 hectares of active disturbances. So as I said, if you juxtapose the interest accumulated with that of the spatial footprint of legacy mines in Western Australia, you could see that the money is not enough. Now, let's try to compare the two. So in South Africa, legacy mines are being rehabilitated or are being supervised under the Section 46(1) of the MPRDA, whereas in Western Australia, we have the Section 8 of the Mining Rehabilitation Fund. You could see that the Western Australian model is levy-based and there is continuous funding compared to that of South Africa, which is state-funded, causing financial instability. Also, the South African own has been very slow due to inconsistent of government funding, but the Western Australian own could be consistent depending on the market's related issues. Now, South African own is financially unstable, reliant on government allocation. Western Australian own is, to quite an extent, is financially stable because it depends on the levy system and there could be continuous funding provided the market is doing well. So what lessons can South Africa learn from Western Australia as far as rehabilitation of legacy mine is concerned? We have to ensure accountability, that is, we have to improve fund management and transparency to prevent misallocation. We have to increase our rehabilitation targets and capacity to accelerate rehabilitation efforts. Also, we have to balance rehabilitation and new disturbances because, mind you, we have legacy mines, but they are still mining which is ongoing. So we have to make sure that those current operators are traceable so that we can hold them responsible for the environmental devastation they are causing. We also have sustainable development, which means we have to adopt long-term approach for environmental restoration and community stability. Yeah, let's come to the conclusion of the lecture. I hope I'm still on time. Conclusion: financial constraints and inconsistent funding have hindered the derelict ownerless mines in South Africa. Also, reliance on state intervention is insufficient for long-term sustainability. That of Western Australia is self-sustaining with consistent funding via mining levies. So what could be my recommendation? We should establish a dedicated fund similar to that of Mining Rehabilitation Fund as operated in Western Australia. Because for me, I believe, though the South African government must stick to what we have, but we could really have like a centralized funding system whereby all the current mining operators could pay into that fund. Then we could also invest. Then we have an interest to supplement the South African budget to really provide financial means for legacy mines. We must also implement mandatory levies on mining companies for continuous funding. And I've already told you the parliamentary session, one lady recommended that we should strengthen enforcement and coordination for faster rehabilitation and sustainable land use. I think that brings me to the end of my lecture. I don't know if I'm still on time or I'm still before time. Thank you very much. And I now welcome questions, then I'll provide you with answers. Thank you very much once again. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. That was a very interesting and lovely presentation. The audience can get your questions ready. You're welcome to post them in the chat or raise your hand online so that we can see if you have any questions. To start off the Q&A, I will start with a question. So, yeah, you mentioned that, the funding model in Australia is levy-based, and their funding is more consistent in some ways than that of South Africa, which is funded through state funding and is often also subjected to political will and the available funding from government. And as a recommendation, you recommend that we also establish a similar fund. However, South Africa has a lot of legislation and models already. Wouldn't it be a little bit better to try and see what we can do with our current legislation in order to enable funding the rehabilitated mines instead of establishing a new model requiring new resources and new institutions and people in charge to do that when they aren't doing it already? So that's my first question. And then also we have an issue with corruption, which happens everywhere in the world, but it feels like it's quite rife at this moment. How do we then protect these funds as a way to kind of make sure that it is actually allocated and used for mining rehabilitation instead of it going away to someone's pocket or, being funded to other things that it is not aimed for? And this is quite a broad question, but I'm just like taking a jab at seeing what your thoughts is. So those are my two questions. You are welcome to answer them, and then we'll give the audience some time to pose their questions or raise their hands for any more questions.
Okay, Mishka, thank you very much for your question. You made mention that South Africa already has models that they use to rehabilitate or provide financial means for legacy mines. Yes, it is true. We have it, but just that I think at the moment they operate in silos. It depends on each individual mining who establish their own funding. It's either they open an account, which is supervised by the Department of Minerals, and that fund is ring-fenced. So if you make mention of corruption, already those mining operators, they've got like accounts whereby they have to pay money into it to rehabilitate their mining sites after there is a closure of the mine. And that funding is ring-fenced. They are not allowed to dip their hands into that. And it's being supervised. The only thing that I'm trying to recommend is that instead of like having those individual accounts, which is being established by each individual mining operators, we could have like a centralized account system whereby those money could be kept in that centralized account, which is being supervised by the mining operators and that of the Department of Mineral Resource. Then we could invest those money from the centralized accounts. Then the interest that accumulates could be used to help finance those legacy mines whose owners cannot be traced. And judging from the environmental havoc, they still need to be financed, and the government is doing it, but just that it is failing to meet our target. So I think I've answered your question. Thank you very much.
Can I please ask?
Yes. Thank you, Fred. You've answered our question. I'm just going to take before we take our first question and the hands online, I see two questions in the chat already, which is from Tuli, which she's asking, when government assumes to take over the rehabilitation of legacy mines, does this mean that government must explicitly commit to a specific mine, or by virtue of the fact that the owners or polluters are not known, then government automatically assumes rehabilitation? So that's the first question from Tuli. And the second question is from Viandri, and she's asking, well, she says she's not very familiar with mining law, but she would like some clarification on why you compare South Africa with Western Australia as opposed to anywhere else. Do they have a similar legal system with regards to mining law, or is there another reason as to why you're comparing the two. You're welcome to answer these questions, and then we'll take our first question and the hands online.
Much. Thanks a lot. Julie, you see, legacy mines, as I showed you the spatial distribution of legacy mines, they are almost about 6,100. So there is financial burden on the government to rehabilitate all of them. And if you look at the projection I gave you, the government had a target that all those mines were going to be rehabilitated by 2038, which means it is not just an individual mine, but a group of them that the government has to provide financial means to rehabilitate them. Now let me go to Viandre's question. I'm not very familiar. Let me see. Yeah, the only challenge that we have, as far as, or the only difference between that of Western Australia and that of South Africa is that, Australia is a country on its own, and there's a section or a province which is called Western Australia. So the Mining Rehabilitation Fund Act is at the federal level, whereby in South Africa we can say provincial level. Let's say like Mpumalanga decides to have their own law to deal with legacy mines. So South Africa, we only have like an overarching law, which is supervised at the national level. So that of Western Australia, I've not really checked, but each federal has its own law to regulate, what do you call it, to rehabilitate mines, because mind you that the impact of mining in, let's say, Mpumalanga province may not be the same of that of maybe Limpopo, you understand? So I believe if we could also have like provincial laws similar to that of Western Australia, I think it is going to go a long run to help those provinces, because if you are supervising it at the national level, it becomes very difficult, because some mining companies, they really, like some provinces are really battling as far as environmental havoc from the mining operators are concerned. So let me just summarize it up. The only difference between that of Western Australia is that those Western Australia operate at the federal level, which is the provincial level. The South African own operates at the national level. And also that of Western Australia has got a centralized system whereby all the mining operators pay the money into it. The government then invests. Interest accumulated on the principal amount is used to rehabilitate the legacy mines. And the principal is used to rehabilitate the existing mines after closure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. Prof. Well, you're welcome to pose your question.
I think there is a last question.
Good afternoon, everyone. No, I think there are going to be many questions.
No, we have quite a few hands.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Very interesting presentation. I am not an economist or a mathematician, but I've been wondering that if we decide and use the interest of the money that we've referenced for future purposes, will the money that stays in the account be able to fund future needs in terms of rehabilitation, given the fact that they always have inflation, year-to-year increases in terms of the cost that we have to incur for anything, including rehabilitation? Do you think it's a wise thing for us to go to the money which has been ring-fenced and then get the interest and use it, looking at needs that will arise in 10 years, in 20 years? Will that not affect the ability of us to be able to use that pot of money to address or to cater for the mines that will be closed in the future?
Yeah, Prof, thank you very much for your question. For me, you see, like, as I said, the mining operation normally span between like 20 years. You get me? So sometimes rehabilitation only takes place after like that is post-closure, after the operation has ceased. So like, let's say between first year up to 20 years, we have like, that is a long period of time. So we could have a centralized system whereby we invest that amount instead of like waiting for the money to sit, you see. And I'm not saying South Africa should do away with its current model, but we could invest those monies to supplement the government budget.
Because my understanding is ring-fenced, it generates interest, which will be used eventually. That's my understanding. Except like got it wrong.
Thank you, Dr. Agyemang. We're going to take the questions with our hands raised online. So, Lapo, you can go first, then Lawrence, and then Paul Hartford. So, Lapo, you're welcome to open your mic and pose your question to Fredua.
Am I supposed to answer a certain question?
No, sorry, just hold on a bit, Fred.
Dr. Fredua, it seems she's having difficulties unmuting her microphone. Since I'm next up, I'll just pose my question, Mr. if you don't mind.
Okay.
I have a hypothetical question for you, Dr. Agyemang. Say you've decided you've had enough of the academic world, you want to enter a new profession and you want to open your own mine. Would you be willing to set money aside in the central fund if the fund were to be managed by government? And would you then be willing to come and mine in South Africa if this is an obligation for you?
Dr. Lawrence, I think I'll be more than happy to do that, because even if the government decides to squander the money, that obligation is passed to the government, not me. Because if there is a law backing that all mining operators should like put their money in a centralized system and the government decides to misuse it, it means the burden on me to rehabilitate is shifted to the government. So at the end of the day, I'll not be blamed. At least I've done my best. And mind you, even there are certain mines currently that even though their money is ring-fenced, but what they do is like they operate for a period of time when they have like, let's say 5 years to the end of closure, they just pass on the battle to small-scale miners. You understand? After then they try to dodge the responsibility to rehabilitate. So for me, I think the centralized system, even if you dodge, the burden is shifted to the government. If the government decides to misuse the money, then it's up to him, because currently it is the government who is supposed to rehabilitate all those mines, including legacy mines and the current operators that its owners cannot be traced. So I'll do that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fred. I like your confidence.
Okay. Now, I just said, Nabu, you're welcome to pose your question in the chat and then I'll read it to Dr. Fredua. For podcast, you can open your mic and then pose a question, and then followed by James. You can then, after Paul has asked this question, you're also welcome to ask a question to Dr. Fred.
Good morning or good afternoon, sorry. For me, it's not a question of what will be preferable by the mining community. What is needed to deal with a significant environmental challenge? I think this idea of a central fund makes more sense, definitely. In fact, you can even go further and say that if you want to, you can even have a levy. And that is therefore sector specific, is not carried by society as a whole. So over and above the interest from a central fund, you can have a levy that is specific to the mining sector to even bolster the funds, available funding more. My question is this, currently financial provisioning regulations is where the funding is set aside for rehabilitation of existing mines and so on and so on. So the problem, my question is the existing legislation in South Africa adequate, that we are not exacerbating the challenge of derelict mines or legacy mines? Meaning that if I look at the legislation, for how long after mine closure is a company responsible for monitoring and dealing with impacts? So that this is not only dealing with legacy mines of, we don't know the owners, the old mines. This is also dealing with the question of new mines, and after closure, then you sit with what I call legacy impacts that only occur 10 years after mine closure. Now, who's going to deal with those? So it's the same question. Therefore, we're exacerbating not only an legacy mine issue, but our current legislation don't really deal with the issue about long-term monitoring and impact management, even after closure, which the legacy impacts you only find will happen after a number of years after closure. So in that sense, I think that the central fund will even still be of value to deal with not only the old mines, but the existing closure of mines and the legacy impacts that will result from them. But what do you think about the current South Africa legislation? Is it good enough that we don't exacerbate the problem? And what would you suggest be the solution? My understanding is that after 10 years, that's it. The owner, whoever, after closure, it then becomes the state's responsibility or then society's responsibility. How do we deal with that situation?
Thank you very much for your question. I think you've made a very valid submission in the sense that the even post-closure, the aftermath effect of the mining may only occur after 10 years. So the question of how to deal with those aftermath effects, because bear in mind that the existing mines might have ring-fenced their money to rehabilitate, but after rehabilitation, there is still an aftermath effect. So I think we should have it more or less like a corporate social responsibility, just like what the Americans are doing, the Good Samaritan law, so that we could involve some private sectors to also come on board beyond the current mining operators. Because as it stands now, the polluter tries to rehabilitate or to avert the environmental issues. But after they are long gone, we still sit with the legacy effect. So I believe if we could make it more or less like a corporate social responsibility for all mining companies to also come in, and it could be tied to the issue of licensing. Because if like you are a mining company from Australia and you decide to also embark on rehabilitation of legacy mines or rehabilitation of the aftermath effects of the existing mines, then you stand a chance to be given license as opposed to those mining companies who decide to fold their arms and sit on the arms chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fredua. James CV, you can open your mic and pose your question too.
Thank you, Doc, for your presentation. I wanted to ask, before the government takes over, what did the government do to and also what did the government do currently? What did the government do, and also what are they doing currently to enforce non-compliance, especially on rehabilitation? Moreover, I wanted to ask an advice on what do you think about the private prosecution regarding non-compliance, especially on mining companies that do not rehabilitate the land. The reason for asking is rehabilitation of the land will cause economic loss to the government on the expenses of the mining companies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Even though like we're dealing with legacy mines, your question for us is beyond legacy mine. It relates to the current existing mines. What the government does is that it issues a post-closure certificate to mining companies who successfully embark on rehabilitation of their mines. And there have been series of court cases whereby some mining companies who fail to honor their environmental responsibilities are taken to court. And mind you, the money, the financial provision for the rehabilitation of the mines is ring-fenced. But some way, somehow, they manage to maneuver in the sense that, as I already alluded to, sometimes after exploiting the land, they try to pass it on to those small-scale mining who do not have the financial muscle to rehabilitate the land after post-closure. So I think it's a very gray area that the government has to strengthen its regulations. As I said, we could tie it to what they call it, corporate social responsibility. We could tie it to issues of giving new licenses. So if, let's say, you were not able to rehabilitate your previous mining sites, it goes against you. So point system could also be introduced, whereby like we have all those mining companies who forfeit the environmental obligations, so that when they come for new license, we could also pin them on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fredua. I hope that has answered James CV's question. There's just a few questions in the chat. A lot of them relate to how these funds will be managed and corruption. So I'll try to cohesively join them together so that they can ask them. So Tuli ask first, that whether or not, hold up. Boypelo, asks whether or not this fund that you propose to implement would be likely to fall apart in the same way that the road accident fund does, or is, and which safety measures will be put in place for this fund not to be subjected to mismanagement. And then Nokora asks, you've highlighted some of the mechanisms for financial provision in mine rehabilitation. Given South Africa's legacy of inequality, how do you suggest historically disadvantaged groups might actively contribute to or benefit from these mechanisms, particularly in terms of oversight or direct socioeconomic opportunities during rehabilitation? And Amanda is also mentioning the idea of corruption and how these funds can be mismanaged, which I sort of joined together. So you can answer those two questions before we move to the next ones. Thank you, Dr. Fred.
Let me go to Tuli's question, whether like we could adopt similar model like that of the road accident fund. I think it all boils down to having a central funding system. So if like the road accident fund has got, or it has characteristics of a central funding system, yes, that is what I'm advocating for. I'm not advocating for the South African current models to be squashed. I'm only advocating for a centralized system whereby it could be monitored by the government instead of dealing in silos, whereby each individual mining companies establish their own funding, which is ring-fenced and all that. But if we have a centralized funding system, we could even make projections as to how much we have than to do in silos. So if the road accident fund is more central, that is what I'm advocating for, so that it could supplement the current South African models. And I think, which question is that? There is a question by Mpo, which says that you indicated that in terms of Section 46, the South African government will intervene. Yeah, the issue of legacy mines is that, as I already told you, mentioned that the legacy mines, mining is as old as creation of mankind. So they predate the law. So obviously, some mining took place in the 1800s. You get me? So obviously, the owners cannot be traced, and they cannot be held responsible. Even if we want to hold them responsible, as I told you, legal principles do not allow that. The non-retrospective nature of the law, the no law, no crime, does not allow that. That is why the burden falls on the government to do so. But the existing ones, whereby we know that we now have laws that regulate rehabilitation of mines. Those ones are being held responsible. There are several court cases that mining companies have been taken to court, their licenses have been revoked and all that. Then only to find out that the money, which is even ring-fenced, sometimes it's not even sufficient. As our prof alluded to, looking at the current economic circumstances, you put money towards rehabilitation, the money loses value. So in the end, we still have to really invest those money to accumulate interest, even if we want to really achieve rehabilitation of the existing mines that we currently have.
Dr. Fredua?
Yes, Prof?
I think there is a question which you slightly missed. Somebody was asking that if you take into consideration the history of our status in this country and the fact that almost all of them have been abused, including the road accident fund, what measures can you put in place to ensure that the type of centralized fund that you are talking about is not eventually abused? We know that of all the institutions in the country, the only one which survived attempts of state capture is SARS. There were attempts to capture it. The treasury was already captured. And there were attempts also to infiltrate the judiciary. So the point which, the question which was asked is, what will you do to ensure that that money is not captured and eaten by crooks?
That is a very interesting question, but it all boils down to corruption. If we could tackle corruption, but as to how we could do it currently, I have limited idea, but if we could really strengthen our laws, our institutions, I think it will go a long run to assist us, because it all has to do with the institution. If the institutions are strengthened, if they are independent, if there is a mechanism for checks and balances, I think it is going to go a long run to help, because we all know corruption is endemic in South Africa, not only in South Africa, but in most parts of the world. But just as South African own is on a rampant, so I would suggest we strengthen the institutions, we make them more independent, and we also involve private sector like the banks. Because if money is kept in the central fund, let's say at ABSA, then we could have like board of directors whereby if we have like maybe 20 signatories to that account, it will make it very difficult for all of them to convince. to be convinced to squander that money. So that is my take on that.
Thank you. It's certainly a very difficult question without a simple answer. And as academics, we can motivate for certain changes to be brought in. But we have to continuously explore how to refine those and make them work. Giving the money to the banks does not guarantee that the banks themselves will not steal it. We know if the 4 big banks in South Africa colluded and weakened the rand, and we suffered as a result of that. And they were given a slap on the wrist, and nothing much really happened. So that is all. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome, Prof. Can I go? There was a question which was like asking for those historically affected people. This topic is very pertinent in the sense that, as I already told you, or I mentioned that mining operation only takes place for sometimes a period of 20 years or something like that. So after that, the land should revert back to the allodia interest holders. So if, like, after using the land for that period of time and you fail to rehabilitate those mines, which means you are failing to return the land in a very good state to the owners of the land. And if it is not returned in a very good state, it means the land becomes useless. And it goes on and on and on, and it affects the next generation. It deprives them of their livelihood. So I believe this issue is a very thorny issue which has to be addressed. If not, we will keep on depriving those historically disadvantaged people, which obviously mining do not take place in cities. They take place in the rural areas. In the rural areas, we have that of customary land system, of which majority of the indigenous people depend on the land for their survival, for their culture, for religious purposes. So if you are failing to rehabilitate those legacy mines, it means you are depriving them of those rights. So intergenerational equity is much of a concern as far as the issue of mining is concerned also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. We'll take 2 more questions. The one is from Tuli in the chat, and the other one is from Dr. Lawrence Erasmus. So Tuli asks, aside from the funding model or the funds that to be used, how much capacity does the South African government actually have to successfully rehabilitate and monitor rehabilitation success? So that's Tuli's question. Dr. Lawrence, you're welcome to open your mic and pose your question, and then you can respond, right?
Thank you, Mishka. Dr. Fredua, I'm just wondering about the accountability of mines. So when a mine company rehabilitates the area and then they get a closure certificate, that happens in terms of the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act. Then a mine would not be responsible anymore for that mine or the environment afterwards in terms of that act only. We also have a duty of care that is established in Section 28 of the National Environmental Management Act, and a duty of care that is established in terms of the National Water Act, I think Section 19. So I think that it would be possible for the Minister of the DFFE and also the catchment management agencies to invoke that duty of care in those respective laws to still hold mining companies accountable for the environmental pollution, irrespective of what has happened in terms of the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act. I would just like to hear your thoughts on that. Remember, that's only the one side. The other side is that Section 28 of NEMA is very broad, and it applies retrospectively. It's so broad that it empowers the minister to hold not only the actual polluters to account. So if a mine pollutes an area and then sells off the land to a new owner, then the Minister of DFFE can even hold that new owner to account for the continuous pollution. So that would also then be another mechanism that can be used to to hold or to source funds from that current owner or new owner, then, or whoever is in control of the land at that time, to be responsible for remediating that area, whether it's a old mine or just other forms of environmental pollution. Can you please just share your thoughts on that, and if you've considered other laws as well, and not only the PRDA? I think you're still on mute, Dr. Fred.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lawrence. Let me answer the first question, which came, whether the South African government has got the capacity. At this current state, I don't think it has the capacity, because we've seen budgetary constraints, even like having 6,100 mines. I think the government is only solving the impact and not addressing the issue, the main issue. If I say the government is only solving the impact, I mean, if you look at the budgetary allocation for the treatment of water, which has been impacted by the acid mines, that's what the government is doing, but it is not really addressing the source of the challenge, which is like the legacy mine. So already the government is constrained. If you look at the money that has been allocated for Zamazama, the maintenance of Zamazama, of which we recently saw at Stilfontein, it's not really dealing with those legacy mines, like addressing the problem at the source. It is the money needed to address the impact of those legacy mines is even a challenge for the government. And to think of the government having to find money to address the source of the challenge, so I would say the government doesn't have the capacity, so to speak. Even budgetary constraints when it comes to addressing those impacts from those legacy mines has been a challenge. We've not been able to deal with the issues of Zamazama. We've not been able to deal with provide funding for water treatment as a result, which is coming from acid mine drainage. So the government is limited in terms of budgetary constraints, and that is why I'm advocating for a regime change. If you could have like other alternative, because it's not peculiar to that of South Africa. America is also battling. They have like more than 500,000 hard rock mine. And their case is even worse than South Africa. Recently, the law that they passed, the Good Samaritan law, says that even though as a private person, you could embark on rehabilitation, but in the course of embarking on the rehabilitation, you may eventually cause havoc. It's like someone is knocked down by a car and you decided to save that person. You go there only to cause more injury, of which the law will hold you responsible. So even the private sector, which are willing to help the government to rehabilitate, are even scared, because in the course of rehabilitation, you may cause or you may add more injury, more sorts to the injury. So they are really advocating for laws to protect them, that in the course of providing those services on pro bono basis, if they cause additional environmental havoc, the law should protect them. So this issue is not as simple as we think. It's not only peculiar to South Africa, so to speak. So let me go to Dr. Erasmus' question. Your question is very long, but I think I'll answer what I can. I think it all goes down to, as we said, like aftermath or the post-closure. There could also be adverse environmental impact resulting from those, so to speak, mines which has been rehabilitated. What I think I could learn from that of Western Australia is that every year they do risk assessment. So depending on how much damage that a mining operation might have caused, then they allocate levy to the mining operator. If let's say like last year you caused so much damage, they come and do the risk assessment and say that, oh, okay, last year it caused so much damage, so you are going to pay like 100,000 for the damage that you've caused. If subsequent year you decided to embark on sustainable mining strategies, then your damage is less, then your levy is also going to be less. So if you could also adopt such a situation or such a model, I think it is going to help so that the levies paid could be tied to the risk impact of those mining operators, so that we are not going to have the issue of whereby we think the closure was successful, but in the end, it is still going to cause environmental devastation, of which we can invoke that section that you made mention of, but invoking it, what if the company has closed down? Who is going to be held responsible? So proper risk assessment should be done, and the levies paid should be tied to the magnitude of the risk that a mining operation causes, to avoid such occurrences in the future, whereby we have to go and look for those polluters, though they might think they have already sorted everything out, now only to find out that closure was not properly made, or the mining site is still causing environmental damage to the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Frey, for all your insights and answering the questions. You've been properly peppered with questions today. So just want to ask if there's any last takeaways that you would like us to think about or to consider before we start wrapping up. And yeah, do you have anything else to add, Dr. Frey? I think you're still on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think I've said enough, and I don't have much takeaways, but I just want us to know that it is not only South Africa which is juggling to provide financial mechanism for rehabilitation of legacy mines. It is a global issue, so we all have to come on board. We don't have to say only the polluter must pay. It behoves on us to also come on board as professionals to really do a lot of research and do particularly comparative legal research, because it all boils down to the law. In the absence of the law, you cannot hold anyone responsible. So we only have to strengthen our law, do a bit of research so that we could know how to strengthen the law to also hold or to also make financial provision or to also provide solutions to those legacy mines. Because in the end, it is really causing, affecting not only us, because it has to do with sustainable development, whereby it is impacting those generations which are not yet born. So we have to do research and take critical look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fredua. That is very wise words indeed. Thank you for presenting to us today and for sharing your insights. I'd also like to thank Prof. Suo, Prof. Harmony, Dr. Lowlands for contributing to organizing this lecture today, and for everyone attending and asking and posing questions. If you have any other questions and things such as that, you're welcome to go look at our website, go Google and research Dr. Agyemang, and then you can ask him some questions. I'm just kidding, don't do that, it's stalking. Okay. Thank you for attending. In fact, the lecture is over. You are welcome to enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, bye.